Newsflash. 1 in 4 adolescents is a criminal. That was a headline I read on an article last week. And according to a survey by Demos, if I'm reading about young people in one of the big 6 newspapers, well then I'm likely to find the words yobs, binge drinking, and crime in the article. But most young people aren't criminals. In fact, according to the government's Community Life Survey, 74% of us will have volunteered in the past year alone. You can hardly call that antisocial behaviour, can you? My name's Izin, I'm 17, and I want to be a journalist. As a young person really interested in stories, I found myself asking this question. If most of the young people I know or have interviewed are positive, then why is it that when I'm reading about young people, when I'm watching the news about young people, that the stories always seem to be negative? In other words, why aren't there more positive stories about our positive generation? Well, I've been doing some research into it, and I think I may have worked out some of the reasons why. And over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to tell you why young people can get such bad press. But more importantly, I'm going to tell you and show you what I believe we can do to change that. So, why aren't there more positive stories about our positive generation? Well, I think one of the main reasons is that scare stories sell. And scare stories about young people, they sell extremely well. The great thing about writing scare stories about young people is that they will always be there. There will always be young people to write about. You can only scare people about the Soviet Union or global warming for so long, but journalists have been selling papers by writing negatively about young people for absolutely ages. And just in case you don't believe me, I'm going to tell you about a big news story from the 60s. And because I'm only 17, the 60s were absolutely ages ago. So, I'm told if you were a young person in the 60s, in order to be cool, you had the choice of joining one of 2 main groups, the mods or the rockers. They wore different clothing, listened to different music, rode different motorbikes, and according to the media, they were also sworn enemies. In the Easter holidays of 1964, hordes and hordes of both young people went down to the beach. And so did all the journalists, expecting that those young people would fight and they could write some brilliant scare stories about it. But when those young people did go to the beach, and when the journalists went to the beach, something terrible happened. There were young people there, from both sides. The problem was that most of them were just standing around. They weren't fighting. And in that moment, those journalists had a choice. They could write a positive story, congratulating young people on not turning to violence, or they could write a negative story anyway. Now, if you know that scare stories sell, unfortunately, you know what story those journalists chose. Research sociologist Stanley Cohen found that the numbers of young people that were arrested, the numbers of young people that were fighting, were massively exaggerated. But why does that matter? What happens when you paint us as young people as the bad guys in society? Well, back in the 60s, it meant a backlash against modern ideas, but today, I believe the consequences are far more severe. You and I are the bad guys in today's society. So it's fine to close our youth clubs and our youth centres. It's fine to raise tuition fees. It's fine that it's almost impossible for me or you to get onto the property ladder. In fact, it's become so normal to penalise young people in society that as part of one prime ministerial candidate's plans to get elected, he's talked about completely cutting benefits for 18 to 21-year-olds. So I'd like to ask you again, why aren't there more positive stories about our positive generation? Because maybe the people who write about us gain more if the stories about us are negative. And that moves me nicely onto my next point. Who is your storyteller? There is a West African proverb that says, until the lion has their own storyteller, the hunter will always have the best part of the story. We as young people are the lions. If we don't tell our own stories, well then other generations will always have the best part of those stories. So who is your storyteller? Maybe it's the media. They do sometimes write about positive young people. Maybe it's your teachers, your bosses who write references and reports about you. But surely, there is nobody better in the entire world to tell your own story than you. I was lucky enough to interview Jermaine Jackman, who won The Voice. And while he was on the show, not only did he sing brilliantly, but he told me he jokingly used the platform to start his campaign to become Britain's first singing black Prime Minister. Now, he used that platform to tell the story of who he really was, not just as a singer, but as a person. Now, maybe we're not on TV, but we can also tell the stories of who we truly are, because we have something that the adolescents of the 60s didn't. We have the internet. And the brilliant, beautiful thing about the internet is that there is no middleman. You can write a Facebook status or tweet something every time you see a young person doing something positive. So, if you went to a TED Talk, for example, and saw some young people speak passionately or engagingly, then maybe you should tweet about that. Just an idea. But the thing is that you have to do this yourself. You have to use the platforms available to you. And maybe you think social media isn't important. But last year alone, Facebook had 1.1 billion active users. That's 1 in 7 people worldwide that you can tell positive stories to. And maybe you're one of those strange young people who don't like social media. But there are other options available to you. You can start a website like I did, izinspired.com. You can start vlogging on YouTube. You can even just talk to people. My point is, the internet is there, right at our fingertips, and we use it all the time. So why not use it for something positive instead? This talk is going to be available on the internet. And so I'd be a bit of a hypocrite if I didn't use it to tell you my positive stories about our positive generation. Another of my favorite interviews was with a man called Governor B. He's a rapper. And I love this interview because when other generations think of rappers, they think of guns and crimes and pants peeking unattractively out of trousers. But Governor B is different. His message of positivity got him noticed by Number 10. And David Cameron invited him for a talk to discuss how to avoid things like the riots that happened. Now, during my talk with Governor B, he said something that really, really stuck out to me. If everyone just performed to their full potential and was positive, then the negativity and the injustice in the world would rapidly decrease. I believe that we as young people, we truly embody that quote. Students from my college this year have raised so much for charity. Another friend of mine started an organisation called YAPCA that aims to improve relations between young people and the police. Other friends of mine spent their summer volunteering in Uganda. I myself was lucky enough to volunteer in Bosnia and Herzegovina last summer, and I will never forget the impoverished Romany Gypsy communities that I worked with. I'll always especially remember a young girl called Maya. She was around the same age as me. We both finished our exams, and we both, most importantly, really liked hair extensions. Now, despite her difficult upbringing and situation, Maya was working extremely hard to achieve her dream of becoming a hairdresser. And so many of us, as young people, work hard. Today, I'm going to share the stage with a young entrepreneur. And the coolest clothing brand that I know is run by 2 young girls, Major London 05. And if you think hard enough, you also know so many young people who are inspiring and positive for so many reasons. Now, if most of the young people you know are positive, but most of the stories that you hear about them, you read about them, are negative, well, then the missing link to the truth is you. You must tell your positive stories, because if you don't, who will? Imagine a world where every time I read a headline like 1 in 4 adolescents is a criminal, I could go on the internet and find hundreds of stories of young people who were working hard, achieving things despite difficulties. Imagine a world where journalists didn't get away with peddling the same scare stories when news ran dry. Imagine a world where everyone heard and had access to positive stories about our positive generation. My challenge and my question to every single one of you today is, will you tell yours?